Pleasure to share some of our thoughts on, on regulation and how we've seen it adopted in Asia. So the majority, this is something really interesting to us. So HashKey, where I started as the first employee, has really been focusing from day one on building what we think is regulatory compliant trading infrastructure and asset management. So I think in Asia, probably there's very little other companies that have licenses in each of the international financial centers in Singapore, Tokyo, Hong Kong, Dubai, and Ireland, like HashKey. So my goal of today's speech is to try to convince you that regulation, at least for exchanges, is not is not something that we should be fearful of or thinking that it's going to take all the fun out of trading. Actually, from our view, what we see with regards to what we've seen for the market in Hong Kong is that once you have this regulatory framework, it really unlocks a huge amount of activity in the local market. So from our perspective, one of the things we think a lot about is regulation as this really important catalyst to mass adoption in this industry. Because I think if there's one common goal that unites all of us in Web3 and in blockchain, it's really that a lot of us are here for trying to bring this technology to the masses. So our view is that regulation is kind of a way to unlock that adoption. And when we think about it, we think about this really from the key perspective of trust. And there was a conversation that I was having recently with a friend of mine who's both of us are very big into decentralized finance and the potential of technology. And if you think in DeFi, a lot of the focus is on trustlessness, right? You shouldn't have to trust centralized companies, and that should be the ideal. But if you actually think about it, what is a centralized company? Like a centralized regulated exchange is just a company that is operating by a set of rules. Similarly, in DeFi, for like a DEX, a smart contract, which is what processes all the transactions in a decentralized exchange, is also just a set of digital rules, right? So at the end of the day, what you're trusting is the rules. And I think for regulated licensed exchanges, the rules are really important and help investors and also help adoption. So here is just some data that we can share, some data points from what we've seen in Hong Kong. And in terms of, on the left-hand side, this is just parts of the framework that we've seen locally with regards to how you actually set up and how it works. I think on the right-hand side, this is data that comes from our exchange that really shows how, after you launch a regulated licensed exchange, how that really contributes to institutional adoption. So what you see here is this is just a comparison between June of 2024 and June of 2025. And the dark, on the right-hand side, the dark column is the spot trading volume coming from institutions. And as I mentioned in the panel we were just having, that a lot of that institutional trading volume in Hong Kong is coming from these securities brokers and these these virtual banks that have integrated crypto asset trading into their platform. So that's really exposing the world of crypto trading to a new type of user base, right? Because most of us in this room and most of us trading on crypto exchanges, generally it's a different user group than the people who are just used to trading on their securities broker app. Thank you. So this is really interesting to see. Over the course of a year, this is like really data proof showing how institutional adoption accelerates after you have a regulatory framework in place in a jurisdiction. So this is just a few notes here. I'm not going to go one by one. I think the gentleman who did the presentation a few minutes ago also went really into depth into various different opportunities that you get from the regulatory framework. I think what we really see, and we touched on this in this panel, what we really see that's interesting in a number of different use cases, once you have regulatory clarity, is I think kind of the number one and most immediate use case that we're seeing is definitely around cross-border payments and and crypto-powered remittances. So as I mentioned, HashKey just recently announced a collaboration with another licensed exchange in the Philippines, CoinsPH, which is working on this type of on-off ramp remittance corridor between the Philippines and Hong Kong. So I think these types of collaborations are going to become more and more frequent once you have licensed players in each jurisdiction. And I think that's also very exciting in Vietnam as the regulatory framework comes into place here. The top of this is cut off a little bit, but this is something that we think a lot about. Actually, what you see in this graph here is you see a number, which is $20 billion. What this $20 billion indicates is this is what we call the $20 billion trust gap that's still in our industry. So over the last 4 years, right, if you think about it, it's a crazy number. Over the last 4 years, over $20 billion has been lost in frauds and hacks by like unregulated centralized exchanges and centralized players, right? So when we think about, besides unlocking adoption, right, when we think about what is the value to people, investors and traders to having licensed exchanges and regulated exchanges, it's really solving the $20 billion trust gap, right? So this is just in the course of 4 years, over $20 billion has been lost to centralized players from frauds and hacks, which I still think is a crazy number. So this is something we as an industry need to solve. This is we think about like the value, like what is the actual value proposition of regulation? I think on the left-hand side, this is something that we talk a lot about is, if you think about what does it mean if you as a user and you as a trader, like trading on a licensed exchange, like what protection does that give you? The protection is really that the exchange actually has a few layers of protection to protect customers. So for example, there is a third-party there's like third-party audits and third-party oversight of the exchange's operations to ensure that it's actually playing by the rules. It's not just the exchange that says it does what it wants, but it actually has to answer to the government. It has to answer to third parties. So that creates kind of an additional layer of oversight and protection. Probably another one of the most important protection is asset safeguarding. So when your assets are held on a truly licensed and regulated exchange, that exchange protects your assets and keeps those assets separate from the exchange's assets. So that creates a lot of protection in the case of bankruptcy, right? If you look back to FTX, one of the biggest issues with that situation was that they were commingling their assets together with their client assets, right? So these are things that are, from our perspective, really matter when you talk about what is the value proposition of investor protection. And as we just discussed in the past few, in the last panel and in the last presentation, is once you get these protections into the market, and you can see from the data that I just shared there, like once you get these protections in the market, you get the legal clarity that starts to attract capital from funds, from banks, and from allocators to start investing more heavily into this industry, investing into startups, buying crypto, putting crypto on their balance sheet. So it has this really important knock-on effect. And as we just mentioned, like probably one of the other like really big important byproducts of regulation and licensed exchanges is the licensed platforms are the ones that truly provide this reliable, reputable on-off ramp into the traditional financial system, right? So I think, again, in terms of unlocking some of the things that have been barriers to this industry, is having this reliable connection into the, into the traditional financial system is important, and it does unlock a lot of opportunity in payments, custody, and banking systems. So some of the things that we've seen in Hong Kong and in Dubai and in Singapore, where we operate licensed platforms, is some of the feedback that we've gotten from our retail users and institutional users is they prefer regulated platforms because of what I just mentioned around custody, safety, the transparency of the assets, the ability to withdraw their assets no matter what. Stable, reliable access to the platform. These are some of the feedback that we've gotten from retail users. On the institutional side, as I just mentioned, institutions are more sophisticated when it comes to risk management. So they ask the right questions around, what are your legal risk controls? How are my assets held? And when you're licensed and regulated, it makes it so much easier to answer a lot of these sophisticated risk management questions from institutions. So that naturally is valued very, very highly by a lot of these partners. And this is, I mean, as we think to the future, the thing, it's not easy running and operating a licensed, regulated platform. There's a lot of competition out there in the market. There's a lot of unregulated offshore exchanges. So why do we do this? Like, what is the bigger vision? And I think one of the things that we truly believe as a company, and I mentioned it a little bit in the panel, and then I think the previous gentleman also talked about it, is there's still so much promise in Web3 and in blockchain and around tokenization, but there's still barriers to adoption there. And our view is that once you have more licensed players and once you have more regulatory clarity, the licensing is what really allows kind of the isolation of the industry to kind of be broken and allow integration with the real world economy. So one of the things that is most exciting to us, and one of the things that we're looking forward to a lot, is finally linking a lot of these really innovative products out of the crypto economy into the real world economy. So a lot of the really great innovation around tokenized assets, the trading and user experiences on exchanges and custodians and stablecoin activity. Finally, as you have more licensed platforms come in, seeing that integration into the real world economy through collaborations with banks, payments companies, and then also ETFs and other fund managers. So this is, to us, is one of the most exciting byproducts and capabilities of a licensed platform. I don't have time to go through all this information, but as you look through the regulatory landscape worldwide, it's quite clear across all continents, right? Asia, Southeast Asia, Europe, the Middle East, that you have a number of live regulatory frameworks: Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan, and the UAE, and also in the EU. And then you have some jurisdictions that are updating their regulatory frameworks, like in the UK and also in South Korea. And then you have emerging regulatory clarity in a few countries. Vietnam is one example. The U.S., the stablecoin regulation has just been approved in the U.S., but there's still some ongoing work around market structure. So obviously, the big trend is going towards more and more regulatory clarity, especially in a lot of the large international financial centers. And this is kind of a quick note on HashKey. Again, I go back to this quite often. It's very rare in this industry that you have a company like HashKey, be founded from day one to really focus on operating under regulatory compliance and under licenses. I think what you see from a lot of our competitors in this market is a lot of people kind of just operate exchanges and operate them in an unregulated way, and then kind of bolt on licenses over time. Where HashKey has been a type of company where we saw the future, we knew that regulation was coming, and rather than operate a company kind of in a gray area, we have built the company to operate specifically under regulations from day one, whether it's in Hong Kong, Japan, Singapore, now the EU, and also now in Dubai. So this is something that we're really proud of as a company, is that we built the entire operational framework and risk management framework of the company to operate under the new world, as we call it. Some of the things that we're very excited about to see in Vietnam. So under the new regulated era, I think one side of it is what do users get from it? What does the country, what does the economy get from it? And I think more and more standards around user protection, I think, is going to be very, very positive for the ecosystem here. I think as us as an example, we see a lot of companies who want to invest into a country once they see more regulatory clarity. So I think capital inflows, more interesting experimentation around cross-border trade. I think what you'd seen in the presentation before around some of the collaborations that the banks have done here around digital finance, I think you'll start to see more and more of that over time. And I think what excites me the most in this is more on the innovation. So for the Web3 devs, right, and for the builders, I think it's really good because rather than build products and kind of not know whether or not you're operating in a gray area or clean areas, once you finally have regulatory clarity, it adds more. It kind of adds a little bit more recognition to the industry, And from my belief and from what I've seen in Hong Kong is it makes it easier for builders and developers to build great products in this industry once you have more clarity and more licensed platforms. So just to tie this up here is I think one of the most, if we look to the future, I think in the next regulated era here, I think for builders, one of the suggestions I would give is, as more and more licensed platforms come to fruition here, and as more licensed platforms come to fruition in Southeast Asia, I think building on compliant companies becomes more and more important. Because as you build on compliant companies with compliant payment rails, it makes it more easier and reliable for your users to have access in and out of fiat. I think on the policymaker side, there's it's a tough balance, but balancing between innovation and user protection is very important. And then on the investor side and on the capital side, what we've seen is that more and more large institutional investors are interested in getting into the market by partnering with regulated companies. So with that, I will leave you guys with this, and look forward to the future here in Vietnam. Thanks.